The zoologist sat back, watching their screen intently as they worked. As had been their routine for some time now, they were observing an interesting group of apes and noting down the various complexities, contradictions, and eccentricities of the species' behavior. In some ways, they had noted, the apes were very similar to them, albeit far more primitive. In others, they found their behavior simply baffling. The apes were a puzzle to be observed and slowly solved until a more complete understanding was put together and submitted to the database, hence the zoologist's current routine. As best they could tell, the apes were divided into several large colonies. These colonies were, for the most part, very similar to each other with very few real outliers. Appearance varied slightly from colony to colony, and there were small differences in typical behavior between them as well, but mostly the colonies acted very similarly to one another. At least, the zoologist thought so. They theorized that the small differences that were lost on them likely mattered a lot more to the apes themselves. After all, even though the colonies interacted and sometimes even absorbed each other or traded members, they still kept their territories rigidly and frequently arbitrarily defined and maintained. One of the biggest differences, or more accurately, the smallest difference that the apes seemed to view as a matter of great import, was how they distributed food and resources. In just about every colony, the vast majority of their resources were hoarded by a select few members who typically passed on those resources to their own offspring or confidants as they aged. This helped maintain a strong social hierarchy where some members of the colony had a lot more power and room for bartering than those who didn't fall into that elite circle from birth. Some colonies were a lot fairer with how they distributed their resources, although none were entirely immune to this issue. To the zoologist, it seemed that the fairer colonies and the more exclusionist ones held a degree of quiet contempt for each other, but they would still frequently interact and even trade. In fact, there was a lot of interaction between the colonies, especially when it came to matters of trade. Different colonies were settled in different locations. This naturally meant that each had easier access to various resources that others didn't. To obtain what they lacked, colonies would trade things they possessed that others did not. The end result was an extensive network of colonies trading with each other. It was quite the remarkable feat of cooperation for a species that could also be so cruel. Of course, sometimes that cruelty would also raise its ugly head in matters of trade as well. The zoologist had already noted that the apes had a tendency towards greed. They also wanted more, regardless of how much they had. This could easily result in what started as equal trade quickly turning into something much more violent. One moment, colonies would be at peace. The next, one would turn on the other and attempt to eradicate them if they didn't part with food and materials that were rightfully theirs. From the outside looking in, it was obvious to the zoologist that this incessant greed wasn't helpful to the species. The most violent colonies lost the most lives and frequently suffered great losses of resources they would otherwise possess in their eternal quest for more. Meanwhile, the more peaceful colonies were typically the ones that thrived. They didn't necessarily experience the same highs or golden ages, but stability was certainly a more important factor for a colony's survival. The violent ones seemed poised to war their way into oblivion. It wasn't just food, water, and materials that turned the apes violent either. It wasn't even always expanding their territories, although that too also frequently caused them to turn to violence that looked borderline suicidal in its folly. Even things that held no tangible benefit often led to different colonies fighting viciously. Many of the colonies seem to have developed some sort of worship for various idols, engaging in various ritualistic practices to appease their deities. Should colonies disagree on which idol to worship and how, lethal violence could also easily arise. The zoologist almost found it tragic. The apes were clearly a reasonably intelligent species. They had vast colonies and complex power structures and relationships. They were evolved enough to create rudimentary art, to worship, and even to trade. But they were also too primitive to have the foresight to see how many of their behaviors were actually very detrimental to their survival. They certainly lacked any understanding of the complexities of food chains and environmental balance. If their greed and violent tendencies didn't cause them to drive themselves to extinction, their endless growth and expansion would. The expansive colonies that the apes built were impressive, certainly. However, they tore down everything around them to build them. They damaged their own ability to access essential resources like food and clean water, and even poisoned the air itself. As best the zoologist could tell, the apes weren't aware of how close they were to a tipping point. The zoologist had actually mistaken the apes for an invasive species themselves at first, a vestige left behind by another species who didn't have the forethought not to interfere as theirs did. It was only observing how similar the apes were to other species on the planet that they realized this wasn't the case. The apes were simply a species with some very self-destructive tendencies. It was a shame, the zoologist decided. In many ways, the apes showed they had the potential to one day evolve to the point of high intelligence. They showed most of the signs and the complicated social structures their societies had developed. They were using tools and developing basic technologies. They had even experimented with rudimentary spacecraft. Ultimately, though, the zoologist couldn't formally classify them as a species with high potential. Despite all their positive traits, they were too much of a danger to themselves. They were far too violent with each other, too expansionist and greedy. Unless they could develop empathy and forethought, they would inevitably continue their headlong rush into extinction and be gone in less than 100 more cycles around their sun. To the zoologist, they would have to remain a curious blip on the radar in the grand scheme of the cosmos. Another species that might well never be ready to learn they weren't alone. It was pitiable, really.
Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different media, books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only discuss things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, mechanics, etc. is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I am Daniel Radford, author, reasonably intelligent hominid, and also your host. And today I'm joined by fellow ape John Kernan as we fuck up our intro, as we conclude. Jesus Christ!
Oh no.
As we close up our cycle on politics and allow you, dear audience, to breathe a sigh of relief and me to relearn how the English language works.
That's okay. I'm an insult to the species, which I guess would make me an ad hominid.
Wow. You've been planning that one. I don't know how you knew I was going to use the word hominid, but there's no way you just thought of that
I
monstrosity on
did.
the spot.
I
John,
so did.
in addition to being an affront to, if not the species, certainly my sensibilities, John was also, as always, the voice you just heard reading my short story Field Study, which is, as it so frequently is, the topic of this episode. In case it, wasn't obvious, both that that is the theme of the episode and that I am running on zero sleep.
Yeah, sometimes you just gotta go to a field, sit down with your notebook, and study, even if that's studying another species very far away through a massive super microscope or super megascope.
And you see, in my head, they were actually in orbit, just blending in with the satellite junk.
That's also valid.
Anyway, let's get into this shit.
Yeah.
So as always, I figure we can start things off with just a brief dive into why I wrote this the way I wrote this, all of that stuff. And I'm gonna level with you, audience. A sizable part of why I wrote this particular story for this particular theme is simply because I'm furious. And I feel like I'm watching our species spiral towards destruction whilst the people in power do nothing about it.
I don't understand. What could you possibly be upset about? Is it the fact that gas prices went up again?
Well, tangentially, yeah, that's definitely a part of it. I'm a little more concerned about, the corruption, the war crimes, the genocide, the governments perpetuating those things, and governments like my own who are cowards and tacitly supporting them by not standing against them.
Yeah, it's it's been a really weird time. There have been days where I've been sitting here like almost I, I've spent a lot of days being angry, but I've had some days where I'm almost more dumbfounded than angry, being like, listen, I knew we still had a million problems, but I thought we were kind of over things like randomly declaring war outside of a few fringe cases that just haven't gone away yet, like a certain somebody who is friends with the people causing this problem right now.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I am completely dumbfounded is a good word because you sort of sit back as almost like an outsider in so many ways, as someone who has so little power as an individual to affect any change. And you watch it and you go, you would have to be monumentally stupid to think any of the shit going on, everything from the pointless wars to the late stage capitalism to the plethora of various human rights abuses going on, was a good idea. All of this stupid, malicious, pointless bullshit going on, leading us down the road to, if not societal collapse, certainly economic collapse.
Yeah, in a lot of places for a lot of people, and it it feels stupidly elementary that the people causing these problems really don't think about how it's going to affect them and the people they're supposed to be in charge of because we're kind of an entire interconnected global community now. There is no economic damage in a vacuum at this point, especially at the scale we're heading towards and that is already starting in some places.
But the thing is, like, these people, they don't really feel much of the effects themselves because they're also fucking wealthy.
Yeah.
It's ordinary people like us who will bear the brunt of the economic fallout. And, we're hardly the biggest victims here. The biggest victims of all this stupidity are the people in countries that are currently being invaded by imperialist nut jobs and racists and xenophobes. They're the people who are being the victims of genocide that no one seems willing to do anything about. We hardly have it the worst, but everyone who isn't some rich fucker with a couple of yachts is going to suffer some of this. And all of this rage is just perpetually simmering in me to some extent or another, and has been for a while, but it's particularly bad right now. And I tried to channel that into an admittedly restrained narrative here, since we are doing a political cycle anyway.
So does that mean you don't want to trade me for my big orange ape with a toupee smoking a cigar?
Go fuck yourself.
Yeah, it's rough times out right now. It's so rough that even living in the stagnant, weirdly white-centric state that I am, where I usually see a bunch of very out of touch older people around when I'm at work, I'm even seeing a lot of those people I would expect to have all the wrong opinions starting to turn towards being like, yeah, this shit is crazy. What the fuck is happening?
Yeah, it's incredible. All it took to make them realize that everything was fucked was that for it to start affecting them.
Yep. That's probably the only good thing coming out of this at all is that people who are normally insulated in the corner being ignorant are being at least scraped by it.
Yeah, but earlier you said dumbfounded, and that really is the mood, I think, other than, again, impotent fury. Because I would obviously a lot of the idea behind this and why I wrote this was because I sat there and I sort of went, an objective observer looking at this from outside our species would think we were fucking all insane. They would
Oh
they
yeah,
would like they would look at this and
absolutely.
go, This can't be an evolved species acting like termites.
There's a South Park episode pretty much about this, and by that I mean an old South Park episode. One of the oldest ones is them thinking aliens are abducting people and accidentally getting abducted by aliens, only to find out that the reason those aliens are around is because footage of Earth is the most popular reality show on like galactic TV.
Yeah, yeah, that checks out. They're,
We're
they're,
a reality show to the aliens.
they're watching me a cat manner.
And it's crazy that that episode is more salient now than it was then, such a long time ago.
Yeah, like there's political writings from hundreds of years ago that are somehow more prescient now than they were at the time. We live in a very, very strange time where the quality of life for so many people is so much higher than it has ever been before. And a select group of, for want of a better word, rich elite are determined to drag us back down to the way shit was at bare minimum in the 30s and 40s.
And the saddest part, it's mostly being caused by people who already have so much that they could stop right now and never need to work again
Yeah.
already. Like,
Some of
it's,
them could solve a lot of the problems that are holding us back as a species very easily if they were willing to part with a tenth of their money.
I had a weird moment the other day where I was finding out, both through stuff I was running into at work and partially because of um, actually TikToks of all things that my wife was seeing a lot, that in our state right now, there is a massive thing, not just of homelessness, but specifically of people like getting their cars repossessed so that they can't even try to do something like sleep in their car.
Mm.
And I was sitting here being like, that is a problem where usually the only difference between that and not is at most like a couple hundred, maybe $1,000. This isn't happening to people with expensive cars. And I'm sitting here being like, it's crazy to think that this is a problem where if I had literally just $50,000, I could go around individually to a bunch of people and turn a bunch of people's lives around from the brink with just that much money. And what are the people who have billions doing?
Not that.
And it's crazy when I think about that, where I'm like, that's so much more money than I have. But that amount that could do so much, even just here in a place that's actually not all that poor, could turn around so many people's lives completely, and they wouldn't even notice it as a blip in their accounts.
Food scarcity and starving populations in countries that are doing poorly economically or agriculturally. Fucking Elon Musk, up like 1% of the money he has would probably solve a good chunk of that. And he spends it on freaking vanity projects.
Yeah, people who people who either make money just for the sake of money and not anything they want to do with it, or people who have other people who care about money just as much, but they don't use it for anything. I
I mean, there comes a point where this you have so much you can't use it all. What could you possibly spend all that on?
I don't know. Hire hire a bunch of people who work for you and in high positions to go around and scatter a bunch of the money to a bunch of people below them in lower positions and branch it out to have those people go around giving it to people who are about to be homeless or something.
You'd think. But yeah, this is all the shit that was going on in my mind as I was writing this and thinking, what would this look like to a truly outside observer taking an objective view? The Martian David Attenborough.
It would be a whole lot of, I'm seeing a bunch of signs that they're smarter than this. Why are they doing this?
Well, yeah, because you think about it, right? As a species, we've done incredible things. We are by far the most intelligent advanced species on our planet. We have built these massive, complex, interconnected societies. We have complicated trade between those societies specifically so we could fill the gaps in, any one nation's or city's personal goods and services.
We have entertainment that is sometimes as politically and narratively complex as the real things happening in the real world just for the sake of stretching our intellectual and creative muscles.
Yeah, we have art and science. We have eradicated diseases. We we have wiped out whole species and brought others back from the brink. We are objectively, to at least from the perspective of someone at the human level, impressive. But for all the grandeur of humanity, we are so greedy as a species and so short-sighted as a species. We constantly, as again, generalizing, we constantly have this drive to take more, more, more all the time without any consideration for the repercussions of that long term. And some of that does actually come from our biology because
Yeah,
way back when we genuinely were apes in caves, that drive to hoard more food, more land, more tools to take care of us first, our immediate tribe first, was essential to humanity's survival. If we hadn't acted like that back then, with that greed back then, we
yeah.
probably would have died out and not made it to this point.
We're so incredibly far beyond that need now.
Yeah, we are now thousands upon thousands of years into humanity's evolution. And I'm talking specifically just Homo sapiens as we are
Yeah,
now.
just the part of evolution where we were already intelligent, thinking, speaking beings.
The oldest extant culture on Earth is Indigenous Australians who have been around in the sort of general shape and form they are in now for like culturally their stories, their history for 50,000 years. You would
Yeah,
think, and and humans as more than one species originally existed for a long time before that. You would think by this point, tens of thousands of years into humanity's evolution, into the human experience, we would have figured out that we have reached a point where that kind of greed is no longer serving our survival but hindering it. But no, because we like the shinies.
and why does that other guy have shiny that I don't? He won't give it to me if I ask. I feel like the only thing I can do is hit him and take it.
We've reached a point where we're still going to war for resources that we could easily have by just asking nicely.
Sometimes resources that, in all the ways that matter, we already had full access to.
Yeah. Uh, uh,
Hmm.
so I think about this a hypothetical alien zoologist sitting in a flying saucer or something, blending in with our satellite junk, watching this unfold, going, there is so much potential in this species. Clearly, they are at a pivotal stage in their evolution. They have come so far. They are making rudimentary forays into space. They have religions and arts and cultures and language. They have an internet.
The internet might be one of the craziest things humanity has done, and I don't mean because of all the crazy shit that's on the internet, just the existence of the internet itself. Like, I had a moment the other day where I was sitting there and I was just like, I wonder where the bulk of the physical servers that have to house the internet exist.
I actually have no idea.
I don't know if anybody does.
That's probably a good thing if that is the case. I mean, like the internet was discovered or invented. Well, they didn't find it. It was invented originally in at CERN in Europe. But I don't know. I do find it hard to believe that like the bulk of the servers that allow the internet to function are just hanging out next to the particle collider at CERN still.
That's that's what part of what's so crazy, right? Is I'm like the internet has to be genuinely a collection of like all the servers in the world that are like connected to this whole. But I'm like, it makes me wonder how much of the internet is physically housed, or if it has genuinely kind of evolved outside of what it is to become like the data version of a collective unconscious, not properly located and anchored in any one place anymore.
I to survive, so it would have to be spread out, I would think. But that's the thing. You called it collective unconscious, and it very nearly almost is in a way, because it's effectively the entire summation of all of the human knowledge we have access to.
Yeah.
Everything we know or have theorized about, everything we have created in some form can be found there. I mean, like, yeah, obviously the pyramids aren't in there themselves, but there's models of them, maps, pictures, detailed dissertations about their histories,
Diagrams on how they were built and why they work instead of falling apart.
dumb theories about aliens planting them.
I know, I can't believe you didn't put that in the story. Why wasn't that zoologist looking over at the pyramids being like, "Dang, our spy cameras are still there."
But genuinely, the entire summation of current human knowledge is there, available for anyone with a smartphone.
And it doesn't come from any one place or one archive or one location anymore.
And that same tool is also allows for incredibly rapid communication and the spread of ideas and the sharing of art. It's all of the things, it's humanity squared. It's all of the things that make us us through this tool magnified and spread rapidly. And I think of that, and then I look at the reality of what the people in power are doing, often through the use of this incredible tool,
These two things are almost irreconcilable to coexist. It's
and yet they
crazy.
do. It's like, how is it we have the internet, but still succumb to caveman brain of you have shiny thing, I want shiny thing, I take it.
You know, of all things, actually, I wish I could remember exactly how it was worded, but Disco Elysium kind of sums it up perfectly because Disco Elysium has many different voices that speak to you, but the deep, dark, instinctual one is literally described as like vicious reptile brain or something
Yeah,
like that. Like, because that's just for some reason still a spot, a dedicated spot in our brains that refuses to go away. And for some people, as they live their lives, that part of the brain gets stronger instead of weaker, despite how little place it has in modern society.
yeah. And and I look at all that and it's like there's a line in here where the zoologist is basically like, at first I kind of thought that this was like some invasive species that some other aliens had dropped off here and forgot and like not thought about. Maybe a couple got off of a ship that were supposed to, like,
Escaped from some sort of traveling zoological wonder cargo ship or the space equivalent of a traveling freak show.
like pythons in the Everglades on a planetary scale. Because
Oh
from
God,
an
we are pythons in the Everglades.
Well, yeah, because from an outside looking in, the behavior of the human race, it's like we are overspreading, we are dominating our entire ecosystem. Nothing can compete with us. We are destroying the environment. We are creating so much scarcity that we're now struggling to even feed ourselves and corrupting and breaking everything, driving all these other species to extinction.
And yet, those of us who have more food than they can ever need won't stop eating to where, like, that's also salient because I'm just imagining many rich people as the pythons you hear the stories about who swallow something that is bigger than they could ever eat and just continue to try even though it is literally going to kill them.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sort of behavior. So an alien from some advanced society looking at us wouldn't I can't reconcile the idea of an alien wanting to interact with us, a species who is capable of interstellar travel, of observing us like from afar without us knowing. I can't imagine them wanting to try and communicate with us because we are clearly not ready for that kind of interaction. We can't even be trusted to manage our own species. And I mean, that effectively a 40-minute rant or something is effectively the entire point of the story. It's how I feel about the current state of humanity, distilled into this. And, obviously it wasn't just written like this, to be a rant, although a lot of it, yeah. The other main reason I chose to do this was because I wanted to demonstrate that a story can be political without being a political narrative.
Yeah, it's a good demonstration of that too. It's a point we already touched on in the earlier episodes, but it always bears repeating because it's one of the things people struggle with the most in narrative analysis of stories. Well, at least people who aren't that experienced in it or, don't actually work at it always want to look at something and be like, "Oh, this is political," or "Oh man, I love this because it's not political." It's like, yeah, yes, it is. It all is. You can't not be political. You wanting something to be non-political is political.
Yeah, and art especially, because art is all, I mean, yeah, some art is just entertainment, sure. But as a general, art is always going to be a reflection of the society that made it, because the artist who created that piece of art, whether it's a sculpture, a painting, a story, a video game, all of those people are writing from a place of someone inside their society who has been shaped by it, who has opinions about it, and that is always going to, in some way, be reflected in their work.
Yeah, you can never change the fact that ultimately politics is just the grand scale of human interspersed thoughts and communication with each other and how we interact, work together, and affect each other, which means it factors into everything no matter what it came from. It's easy not to like politics. I generally consider myself somebody who dislikes politics, but not because I dislike the concept of politics. It's because I so often dislike politicians and the things they're doing. People forget that that exists on micro scales and what you call it, cosmic scales, and not just the macro scales. There's so many levels to it beyond just the part we hate. The part we hate is just really loud, and you can't let yourself decide that just because that part sucks, that's the only part that exists, so you can just blanket hate the word when that's not what the word means. That's not what the word is for. And I know words change over time, but there are some things about them that won't and can't, and I think politics is kind of one of them.
Politics is one of those things where, whether you like it or not, you are a part of it. If you are of voting age, if you are an activist, if you choose not to be an activist, if you choose not to vote for whatever reason, it's not just politicians that are part of politics. Everyone who is part of human society has agreed to be part of politics by virtue of either not engaging with it or engaging with it directly. Every
And no
choice
matter
we
how
make
small a part
shapes
of it
it.
you are, you're having at least the tiniest possible effect on the whole just by existing and participating in society.
And that's why I wanted to show this in this way. I wanted to remind the audience, that art is shaped by politics, and our politics is going to find its way into our art, even if the story is not explicitly. I mean, this is obviously a very political story. It does touch upon political and economic ideas very openly, but it's not a story about politics. It's not about a president or a congressman or someone in parliament here or a dictator or a king. It's about us. It's about what our society looks like and how it acts, and that is politics, but it's not in a political narrative. I wanted to showcase, especially because obviously our last two stories were very political narratives. I wanted to show how that is politics is interwoven into our art in other ways.
Yeah, and it's not something you can avoid. Even people who aren't conscientious like actors in politics, I mean, even kids, even kids are political because kids are the future and kids are one of the things people fight over what to do with the most, despite the fact that they can't be involved and really have a voice themselves.
Not yet, but all their opinions are starting to be shaped by the people around them and those people's politics, and they will eventually form their own opinions based on all these factors and put those opinions out into the world in some way, shaping the politics of it all.
Yeah, and it's a responsibility it's a responsibility I think people need to think more about and why politics aren't something we should run away from so much if we really do have thoughts and opinions and feelings on how things should be, especially when we're looking at things getting worse and doing in ways that make us upset. That it doesn't mean you need to be a political activist, but don't cover your eyes, don't run away from it and act like it doesn't exist. At least not all the time. You need it sometimes. Some people have to shut their eyes to it sometimes to stay sane, but that can't just be a permanent aspect of your life.
And that's why politicized art is so important, because it's a way for people to engage in challenging themselves, in thinking politically and societally and economically and philosophically. All these ideas can be presented in a palatable way to a mass audience through art. Because we empathize with characters and become engaged with narratives, we inevitably think about the ideas being presented in stories, and those stories shape so much of our opinions. People, I've said it a million times, I'm sure, but people don't think about how much the fiction we consume from an early age all the way into our twilight years shapes our thoughts and feelings and opinions. There are people out there who were staunchly conservative, who were changed by art, by being forced to confront the realities of what their viewpoint actually meant, because through a story was the only way that was ever going to happen, because they're not going to go into the places where they're victimizing people. It's how Orwell communicated the dangers of totalitarianism and propaganda, and uh, there was another word I was going for in there. It was very impressive, I'm sure.
It's
Surveillance. There we go.
yeah, no, oh God, yeah, Big Brother.
Yeah.
Oof. We love all that. And, I'm thinking about it now. Could have been an excellent choice for one of the episodes, actually, if I had
Oh,
thought of it.
for
Although I think we
sure.
already talked about it. No, not just Orwell, but suddenly as you were talking, I started thinking of Vinland Saga
Oh yeah.
of all things. It's got some really strong points on that too, but again, on even the micro scale, because there's a war going on. There's actual politics happening in Vinland Saga, but also some of the parts that speak to me the most are the personal things it says about responsibility and how to act on things, and how, one of the things the main character has to learn is some vague words his dad says at the beginning of the series that actually say a lot. That being like, a truly strong man, although really just no need to gender it. Like, the strongest person has no enemies, and you don't have no enemies by killing all your enemies, because that will always make more enemies. If you are really strong, you'll realize that nobody truly is your enemy. You have obstacles. You might have people you have to deal with, people who are bad or need to go away, but like, making enemies, it never makes things better. And in a way that is a very politically meaningful thing. It's the type of thing that happened in a lot of shows I watched, things I read, stories I consumed when I was younger, that despite them not talking about politics or shoving dogma into my head, still shaped who I am and how I feel about things, because even though most of them at least were fictional, I saw those things happen. I saw the way these characters reacted and like learned and grew from these thoughts and philosophies, and it resonated with me and made me, even in things I hadn't already experienced or tried to understand yet, go, yeah, I think I feel that way too.
Yeah, and well said. And this story, field study, I don't think it's one of the best things I've ever written. It was done in a bit of a rush. It's not one of the highest quality things I've done, but I really like the idea behind it. And I think stories like it, in its vein, stories that communicate important political ideas, these deeply important issues in these fictionalized ways, are important. I think we need more and more art that does this, especially to fight back against the tide of just misinformation and bullshit, because it's one of the only ways these ideas are going to get into people's heads, where they're not going to have to spend the whole time questioning, what's actually going on, if it's real, if it's a lie, because they know it's fiction. And weirdly, that means they've it frees you to embrace the truth of the ideas.
Yeah, it takes away the ambiguities of reality, but more importantly, the ambiguities of like real other people's voices being in your ear and constantly coloring and affecting how you're allowed to interpret what you're looking at.
Yeah, because you know that this is someone's voice telling you a story because they're trying to communicate ideas to you.
You don't have to wonder what the agenda is or what the money behind it was, or if something like 8 steps removed caused the creation of what you're looking at and manipulated it in some dark way you couldn't see coming. They might write that though.
Obviously, most of the things that I write are political because it's art, and art is by default political most of the time. But I think I'm not going to stop doing that, and I don't think any artist, any writer, painter, illustrator, whatever, is liable to stop either, because it's just too built into who we are and it's too important.
And I don't think that's what people who consume stories and media want anyways. They might sometimes misunderstand and think it is, but really it's not. It's one of those things you would instantly see people missing and wondering why everything got so gray and bland and empty if it was gone.
Yeah. And look, hopefully by the time this episode actually comes out, a miracle will have occurred and the world will no longer be looking quite so bleak. But at the time of recording this, things aren't looking great right now. And one of the biggest, most powerful tools we have to fight back against this shit is art. It's commentary through art, through the stories we tell. And it is very much my hope with this cycle that one of the things we've illustrated is not just how important it is, but how important it is to individuals, even those who don't realize it, how powerful a tool it is. And it is my hope that the things I write have a positive influence politically and socially and philosophically, even on just a handful of people, because that matters.
Yeah, and ultimately, what politics is supposed to be at its core, more than anything else, is expressing. It's kind of just the expression of philosophy. It's what do you think? What do you feel? How do you think things should be? And considering that's how you want things to be, embrace that. Express yourself, mire yourself in the expressions of others because that's the only way to understand. It's the only way to grow. Hiding from it, the best thing hiding from it can possibly do is get you in a bubble where you don't have to hear any voices you don't like. And before long, you'll be stuck in an echo chamber, and that's all you'll hear. And you'll either be miserable or lost. There's no point.
Yeah. Well said. When it comes down to it, art and politics are both just communication. And we need some healthy communication in our species right now more than ever. So, whatever aliens are out there watching us as reality TV, become bored.
Yeah, bore them. And
Please
for
bore
any if
them.
and for any of you out there who are zoologists peaceably watching us for education instead of entertainment, don't give up on us.
We're trying,
Not
some of
yet.
us anyway.
We're,
Oh boy.
most of us are doing our best. It'll get better, probably, hopefully. I believe it will. I just don't know when.
On that borderline optimistic note, I think we could actually wrap this up there. We've said a lot of what we wanted to say, I think. I think we've, through this cycle, touched on a lot of important things that I've wanted to put out there for the world to, consider for a while. And hopefully we've not alienated too many people by doing a politics cycle.
Hopefully not.
Let's see how much our viewership tanks when this airs.
Who knows? Maybe we'll bring in a couple people who weren't before.
For those of you who've managed to stick around, thank you. You may now unclench your ass cheeks as we are exiting our politics cycle. If you have managed to enjoy this cycle and would like to listen to more, if you've been listening to this on Spotify or YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, all that, you can also find these episodes on my website, radfedrights.com, where I also post my various stories and poems. You can buy my books there. You can follow my serial epilogue there. A lot of it is deeply political, even if it is very, very, very buried in there. You could also read my blogs and articles, just mostly about writing and how to tell stories, which is somewhat less political if that's more your taste. And if you are interested in following more of John's work, he will, of course, be collaborating with me plenty on many more things, but you can also find him streaming as Sephir, Sephear, on Twitch and YouTube.
I promise I'm not that political most of the time.
Only when I force him to be.
I have politics. I just don't always express them because I am afraid that I'll do it wrong.
I'm going to keep doing it anyway.
Do it.
All right, well, goodbye. Don't doom us all.
Don't, please.